questions. And I call on Deputy Willie O'T.
Tánaiste, as you will be aware, a great deal of controversy has attended the leak of the government memorandum on water charges. Now, I want to ask you a number of questions this morning, not from a political perspective, but because they are echoes of the questions I'm being asked on the doorsteps. As you will be aware, as the local and European election campaign intensifies, this issue of water charges and these questions are coming up on virtually every doorstep. Now, they're the same questions that are being raised by members of your own party, rightly in my view. They're the same questions that were raised by Minister Gerard Sullivan on Morning Ireland, and I think you'll agree with me, or at least I hope you will, that it's only right and fair and just that the public should have the fullest possible information on these matters before they're called to cast their votes on the 23rd of May. So what I want to ask you is this: is ability to pay going to be a central feature of the new regime? In other words, will people be entitled to exemption or part exemption based on their income? Secondly, can you confirm the Taoiseach's average figure of €240, although Minister O'Sullivan says that that doesn't mean very much in the present context? Is it going to be, is that figure applicable only for the first quarter or for the first year? Or is it going to, is the overall charge going to be fixed for a number of years, or is it subject to change after the first quarter or the first year? Thirdly, can I ask you what will be the position of people who haven't been metered by the time when the charge kicks in on the 1st of October? Because, as you will be aware, that applies to about 3/4 of possible water taxpayers, people who haven't been metered by the 1st of October. And finally, can I ask you, do you intend to publish the detailed legislation on this matter before the local elections?
Thank you. Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, as you know, in our programme for government, we indicated that the charging for water would be based on a charge after a household allowance, after there would be a free allowance, and it would be a charge based on a metering system, which would have the advantage of enabling people to conserve water and to reduce their household bill. Work has been done on it up to now, and as the Taoiseach confirmed yesterday, the Central Statistics Office produced a figure which was €240 on an annual basis as the average charge which they calculated would be required to keep water off balance sheet. There are still a number of issues that need to be addressed. Frankly, I wish that they had been addressed some months ago, but they do need to be addressed. First of all, there is the question of metering. The best estimate is that the number of households that will be metered by the end of the year will be about 400,000, which would mean that about 3 out of every 4 households would not be metered by the time the charge would come in. That raises the question of how those households would be charged. I think there are a number of issues that have yet to be addressed. First of all, can the pace of metering be accelerated to increase the number of households that are metered? Or secondly, could some kind of an arrangement be made whereby, as households are metered after the charge is introduced, that should have some kind of a rebating system? And those are issues that need to be addressed and concluded. The second issue that needs to be addressed is the question of ability to pay. Now, the €240 that the Central Statistics Office has come up with is certainly less than what was being proposed earlier in the year, and certainly less than some of the very exaggerated figures that have been in the public domain in the meantime, and it's certainly less than the €400 that Fianna Fáil would have introduced the charge at, indeed from an earlier stage. But it is still a very big bill for any household that is having difficulty paying it, and I'm thinking particularly about older people, pensioners, people who are on low incomes, and therefore it will be necessary to have an ability to pay provision or measures which address the issue of ability to pay before we conclude and before we settle and agree on what the charge will be and what the regime will work to. I want to see those decisions made quickly because I want to see there being certainty and answers provided for them. But I think it's important that we get the decision right, that we address the issue adequately and satisfactorily of how households which will not be metered by the end of the year will be treated, and secondly, in particular, how people who are in difficult financial circumstances, how the issue of ability to pay and affordability will be addressed.
Deputy O'D.
I thank the Tánaiste for his clarification. Do I take it, because as I say, this has been raised on every doorstep, and you know, one of the things that's coming up very, very frequently, as I'm sure my constituency colleague Minister O'Sullivan will confirm to you, is people who are on social welfare, people who are pensioners, people on low income. Do I take it from your reply that their ability to pay will be definitely a feature of the new regime? And secondly, can I also deduce from your reply that in the estimated system, which will apply to 3/4 of households when the charge kicks in on the 1st of October, that if what they pay under the assessed system is more than they would have paid otherwise, that there will be a rebate system in place? And finally, can you tell me when will you be in a position to publish the legislation?
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I should say, of course, that no decisions have been made on this, on any of this issue yet. Where we had the first discussion at Cabinet on this yesterday. But to answer specifically your questions, we do have to find a way of dealing with the issue of households who will not be metered by the end of the year. Because if we want to have a water charging regime which encourages water conservation, which enables households to reduce their bill, we're going to have to deal with that. My own view is that we should see what we can do to accelerate the metering, first of all, to maximise the number of households that are metered by the end of the year. And then as households are metered after that, that we should have a rebate system, so that you know, if household usage is lower, that the bill can actually be adjusted. I think we also have to take into account the situation of different households. I mean, there is, in many ways, there is no such thing as an average household, you know, because water usage, for example, medical need may be a factor, and I think that has to be worked into the equation as well. On the issue of ability to pay, yes, I do believe that we will have to find a way of easing the burden on those households who will find paying the bill very difficult. And as I said earlier, I'm thinking particularly about older people, pensioners, people who are on low incomes. You know, okay, the CSO figure 240 is less than what you would have done. It's less than what was talked about earlier in the year, but it is still a very big bill for a household that is on low income, and that issue is going to have to be addressed before we conclude on it. And finally, can I just say, it is an issue that I want to see addressed as quickly as possible.
Deputy O'Quaila.
Tánaiste, do you recall the Labour Party advertisement in the course of the last general election that read, "Look what Fine Gael has in store for you. Fine Gael, every little hurts." And prominently featured was water tax at the suggested cost of €238 per annum. Now, yesterday, the Taoiseach confirmed the accuracy of that Labour Party ad by stating that the average water tax to be imposed on people by this government will be €240 per annum. Now, does the Tánaiste agree, and I'd ask him to listen to these statements, does he agree that the imposition of water tax is half-baked, that the government has not thought through details of key issues like metering, standing charges, the ability to pay and conservation? And does he agree that it would not survive public scrutiny if left in its current form? Does the Tánaiste agree with those sentiments, sentiments that were expressed by a Labour Party voice to the Irish Times yesterday. Do you agree with those statements, Tánaiste? Do you believe that your party is of one mind with Fine Gael in relation to these matters, or are you even at one mind with yourselves in relation to what people are saying? And how can you reconcile these statements with the fact that, despite all that you warned the electorate about back in 2011, you went into government with Fine Gael with your eyes wide open, you negotiated a programme for government, you supported the inclusion of water tax, and in fact, on each of the occasions going forward, you have supported that proposition, including on the last day, the last sitting day of 2013, when you, with Fine Gael, rushed through legislation at that particular point in time without scrutiny and without proper debate. Where does the Labour Party stand in relation to what is now proposed?
Thank you. Tánaiste.
Well, you know, this is typical of Sinn Féin. You don't give a curse as to how it will impact on the people. All you care about is how it's going to play politically. Every single.
Thank you.
Every single.
No need for the chorus, please. No need for... Please.
But we don't.
Okay, you had your 30 seconds.
What of course we don't hear from Sinn Féin and never will hear from Sinn Féin is how you propose to ensure that the people of this country have an adequate and clean and satisfactory supply of water into the years ahead. You've never made a proposal in relation to it. You have never made a proposal as to how water is going to be supplied.
Sorry, the way you document, please, you can't display that.
And of course, you conveniently ignored the fact that the previous government had agreed. The previous government had agreed in the memorandum for understanding that it signed with the Troika that the charging for water would be on a full cost recovery basis. A full cost recovery basis, Deputy O'Quillan, would involve a charge at a minimum of about €400 per house to the smallest level of household. As you now know, the proposal that the government is considering involves a very substantial subsidy from the state for the provision of water. The issue of what level the charge will be at and how it is structured is an issue that is under consideration by the government. And as I've said earlier, it is an issue that we are considering in the context of how we will do the metering in the fairest and most reasonable way, and how also we will ensure that the issue of ability to pay is addressed. But of course you're not interested in any of that because you're away in some kind of a fairy tale, and the only thing that we can be sure about is that if Sinn Féin had its way, this country would not only be not out of the bailout that it was plunged in by the last government, but would be right in the middle of a second one with the enormous consequences that that would have for public expenditure, for taxation and for the delivery of services to the people.
Well, there's no
please.
surer indication that you're hitting the right button when the heat comes back like that, because, you know, there was such calm in the earlier response. What is right is because we are right on the button. So let's eliminate. Let's
have a supplementary question.
Let's eliminate the anonymity in relation to Labour Party commentary to any paper or media. Let's quote a Labour Party deputy from this morning. Let's ask you again, Tánaiste, do you agree with the statement this morning by Labour deputy Kevin Humphreys that Fine Gael in government has, and I quote, acted in a dishonourable manner?
No. I'm
asking you now, do you agree with what Deputy Humphreys has said? And isn't it the truth that the Labour Party has, you know, decided long ago to impose water tax on every single household across this state, irrespective of the ability to pay of the household itself?
Thank you.
And isn't it the case that you have fully. When you hear this nonsense coming back, you know that Labour are under pressure. You're under pressure, and it's not just water pressure. Isn't it the case that you have participated in this staunchly from the beginning, and you are co-hosts of the introduction of what is now proposed?
Thank you.
And isn't it the case, Tánaiste, just in conclusion, that all of the posturing by yourself on the television screens and the other commentary that I've just indicated is because you are facing an electorate on the 23rd of May, and you're trying by any and every means.
Thank you, Deputy O'Connor.
Terms of the negative impact of yourself, of the positions that you have articulated for years, and the abandonment of your respective electorates.
Well,
Would you please? Would you mind, please?
I think there's one thing that I can't be accused of, and that's of making decisions to court popularity. After what this after what this government after what this government
listen, if some members here insist
after what this government has done and decided over the past number of years in the interests of the country and in interests of getting recovery, we're certainly not in that situation. But of course, you know, when it comes to posturing, Deputy O'Quillan, nobody comes in second place to Sinn Féin. You're presiding over a regime. Your party is presiding over a regime in Northern Ireland where the average property tax and water charges is €950. And you come in here,
Deputy Johnson, will you stay quiet, please? You're not being listened to. With your mind winding up for overtime.
You know, the only thing I can say to it, Deputy O'Quillan, is it's partitionist hypocrisy.
Deputy Collins, thank you.
Tánaiste, I want to follow on from the last speaker and refer to the row, or so-called row, between yourself and the Taoiseach, and between Labour and Fine Gael today and yesterday. I'm confused as to exactly what that row is about. We know that this is proposed by Fianna Fáil. Labour has agreed to this new austerity tax. There's no dispute about that. The government has targeted raising $500 million in 2015 from this tax on water. There's no dispute about that. To achieve that target, the average charge per household will be at least €240 next year. There's no dispute about that. There will be a standing charge of €50. The free allowance will be 30,000 litres for an adult or 65,000 for a child. All of this has been discussed at the Economic Management Council for weeks. And there's a broad agreement between Labour and Fine Gael about this. So what's all this dispute about? Why are we all getting so indignant in the chamber in the last few days? Is it not the case that Labour want to delay the actual decision and the announcement until after the local elections in May? Is this not the real issue? I put it to you, Tánaiste, that the concerns of Labour is not about the effects of the new tax on families, on the unemployed, or those with illnesses or disability, but the effect on Labour's vote. The CEO have come out just in the last half an hour saying that there'd be no ability to pay clauses in the payment. The CSO figures released yesterday showed that its disposable income has fallen by 3,000 since 2008. People now face a new tax on households on top of the property tax. The new tax will be a huge burden on 27% of the population, 1.2 million who suffer deprivation, on the 13% who cannot properly heat a home, the 1 in 3 children in this situation, on the 16.4% of people in work who suffer deprivation, 2.5 times more than 2008. Maybe we didn't understand that defending the vulnerable meant not defending any of those who did not cause the crisis, those people who become economic units now in this economy, in this country, rather than citizens. But is it about defending the vulnerable in Labour, who are likely to get a hiding in the May local elections?
Honestly.
Well, first of all, the energy regulator has begun a consultative process on the issue of water charges. That would be in two parts. First of all, in relation to the structure of the charge, and secondly, in relation to the amount of the charge itself. As you should know from the legislation, there is provision for the Minister to give direction to the energy regulator in relation to certain matters. Those matters will now have to be around, as I said earlier, first of all, the issue of how the situation of households which will not be metered by the time the charges will come to apply will be dealt with. And that does have to be addressed. There are a number of possibilities, as I said earlier on, but we have to make a decision in relation to that, and that's a very substantial issue. I mean, we have a situation which we have where 3 out of every 4 households will not be metered as things stand at the moment. By the time the charge comes into effect, we need to have a fair way of dealing with that situation. I don't think it is acceptable that you can have a charging just based on some kind of crude decision based on the type of house concerned. I think you have to look at the issue of water usage in that house and look at the size of family and their needs. The second issue, as I said earlier, is the issue of ability to pay. The €240 is which is recommended by the Central Statistics Office, and about which, incidentally, no decision has yet been made by government. But that figure, which admittedly is less than was talked about earlier, less than the Fianna Fáil figure of 400, is still a very large figure for a family that is having difficulty to pay it. And the issue of ability to pay is going to have to be addressed. And all of these issues are issues that are going to be considered by government before a complete and comprehensive decision is made on the water charges regime that will apply, and then based on that decision the various directions will be given to the energy regulator, which will inform the consultative process.
Thank you. Deputy Collins, 1 minute. Thank you.
Tánaiste, how the worm has turned. In 1997 you opposed water taxes. You campaigned against water taxes. You applauded and accoladed when they were abolished in 1997, and now you stand in here and try and make excuses as to why people are going to be imposed with more taxes like water. Is it not the case, Tánaiste, that water and access to water is a basic human right? This thing about the litres, or 3,000 litres of water per person, with 2 showers a week, 2 flushes of your toilet a day, possibly getting a couple of cups of water out of your kettle, is absolutely deplorable coming from a so-called Labour party in government. You should hang your heads in shame. I had a woman emailing me yesterday saying, I suspect legally you're entitled to water. There's no problem with over-excessive use of water if people are forced to pay. And she makes a point that their party have become poacher-turned-gamekeeper. And I think she is absolutely correct on that. Can you stand over imposing another tax on all these people, the top the lowest 10% of people who only have 3% of all the income, and leave the top 10% of 24% of the income practically no tax? The top 300 richest people in this country increased their wealth by another $6 billion last year, increasing their wealth 2 years in 2011 and 2012 by nearly $10 billion. And you preside over that? They're not even asked to pay a 10% tax on that. 10% on that wealth, €77 billion, would be €7 billion to invest in our water.
Well, the Deputy is right that water is a basic human right, and that is why we have to ensure that the people of this country have an adequate, clean and safe supply of water into the years ahead. We already know, as a result of the neglect of the water services by the previous government, that we already have a serious problem in relation to our water supplies. In the greater Dublin in the Greater Dublin area.
Sorry, please.
In the Greater Dublin area, we are already at a point where there is a risk to continued supply. There's already 18,000 people on boiled water notices. There's already, we're told by the EPA, that there's already 16% of supplies that are at risk if remedial action isn't taken. Now, the approach that the government has taken on this issue is to establish a state-owned water utility to ensure that our water resources are maintained in public ownership and that there's investment in water into the future. With regard to people who are on the lowest level of income, we don't need any dictation from you, Deputy Collins. As I said earlier, that is precisely why we have to address the issue of ability to pay. We have to address the situation of those households and those families who will find a water charge difficult to pay, and that's why we have to address the issue of ability to pay as part of the decision that we have to make. And we also have to address the issue of metering so that individual households will be able to reduce their bill by conserving water. That's the sensible way of doing it, and it is the way that takes account at all of the shouting slogans at it doesn't resolve it. It's making decisions that are based on the needs of people, ensuring that those who are on the lowest income are protected, that the burden is eased on them, and ensuring that families will be able to reduce their bill by water conservation.
Thank you. That completes leaders' questions for today.